You're listening to Nutrition Matters podcast with Paige Smathers, registered dietitian nutritionist. Nutrition Matters podcast explores how to approach food and your body in a whole new way. I interview people who share stories and expertise in rejecting diet culture, making peace with food, and discovering a more positive, realistic, and sustainable approach to health and well-being. I'm Paige Smathers, registered dietitian nutritionist, and owner of Positive Nutrition, an in-person nutrition therapy practice in Salt Lake City, Utah. I offer free resources, including this podcast, a blog, and posts on social media. If you're local to Salt Lake City, check out our services and availability for appointments, and keep your eyes out for in-person groups on mindfulness, intuitive eating, body image resilience, and more. Go to positive-nutrition.com and hit subscribe if you'd like to keep in touch. I also offer online courses covering topics like the science of nutrition, mindfulness, and healing your relationship with food. Check those out at positive-nutrition.com/academy. If you like what you hear on the podcast, you can make a difference by leaving a review, sharing with friends and family, or making a donation. Thank you so much for your support. You can also find me on Instagram or Facebook if you'd like to have a little more food for thought at Paige Smathers RD. Thank you so much for listening. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Nutrition Matters podcast, and thanks so much for joining me today. Every once in a while, I like to just sit back and think, wow, it's kind of amazing that I talk into a microphone and interview someone that I think is really cool and have a conversation and then put it out there, and real humans, end up hearing my voice and end up hearing my guest voice and learning from them and their wisdom. And it's the coolest thing. And I'm so grateful and honored that you would spend your time with me and let me be a little part of your story. So I wanted to just take a minute and say thank you. Thanks for supporting me. Thanks for being a part of this. Thanks for trusting me. Thanks for being patient with me as I am imperfect. And it's a real joy. So thanks so much. Really quick, before we get into, I want to explain what I'm talking about here and who I'm talking with. I want to just really quickly share that we did have a little bit of trouble with the audio. So I did my best to edit and do my best to kind of give you a good audio version to listen to, but just know it's a little shaky. It's a little imperfect. But as you learned in the last episode that I published, I am just trying to be comfortable with putting out imperfect things. So thanks in advance for your patience with that. So in this podcast episode, I interviewed Amanda White, who is a licensed professional counselor and a yoga teacher. She specializes in working with women with eating disorders, substance use disorders, and trauma, and specifically in how all of these overlap and intersect. She herself is actually in recovery from substance use disorder as well as an eating disorder. So she shares both her personal and professional experience with this intersection, which I think is so important. So Amanda is the owner of the private practice in Philadelphia called Therapy for Women. She leads yoga and mental health retreats using the physical practice of yoga along with the power of group therapy to allow people to break free from patterns that are keeping them stuck. I truly enjoyed this conversation with Amanda. I think she's a wealth of knowledge. She has such a great way of explaining herself and explaining these concepts and being so compassionate and just nuanced and messy along the way, and I love it. So I'm really excited to share this episode with you, and I'm so glad you're here. The one quick announcement I do want to make is just about my brand new online course called Raising Intuitive Eaters. So the goal and the idea of what we're doing there is we're just exploring how do we bridge the gap of what we're learning about intuitive eating into how we feed our kids. So this is for any parent, caregiver, nanny, grandparent, auntie, neighbor, whoever. If you want to learn about how to interact with children when it comes to weight and food and body image and things like that, this is a 5-part course with 5 different lessons in it, all about how to set boundaries around diet talk, how to set up a structure around meals and snacks and food, how to understand what your roles are, how to understand what the child's role is in the feeding relationship, how to empower positive body image, what to expect in terms of growth and weight during childhood and during adolescence. So if that piques your interest and you want to check out more and learn more details, feel free to head on over to positive-nutrition.com/academy, where you'll find the Positive Nutrition Academy, and then just click on the icon for Raising Intuitive Eaters. All right, with that, I am so excited to share this conversation with Amanda, where we discuss the similarities and distinctions between addictions and eating disorders. Hi, Amanda. Welcome to Nutrition Matters Podcast, and thanks so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Paige. I'm a big fan, so I'm excited to chat with you.
Oh, the feeling's mutual, for sure. So Amanda, talk about who you are, just kind of in general at first, and then we'll dive into more of your story as we go through the topic for the day.
Yeah, so I am a mental health therapist. I specifically specialize in women, and I specialize in the overlap of eating disorders and substance use disorders. So my whole practice, we really talk about how we specialize kind of in the in-between and how different mental health disorders overlap and interact. I have a private practice in Philadelphia. It's called Therapy for Women, and yeah, that's pretty much it.
Awesome. Well, I'm a big fan of your work, and we've connected on social media, and you do such great work exploring a lot of similar things to kind of what I do in the nutrition place of like, we're both very interested in kind of the middle way and sort of the gray area and the nuance that sometimes gets lost in a world of quick fixes and social media. And so I think we really kind of vibe on that level.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Okay, so tell us sort of a little bit about your story. How did you become a therapist? Why were you interested in that space? Why are you gravitated toward the intersection of eating disorders and substance use disorders? Tell us about all of that, and I'll maybe ask some follow-up questions as we go.
Yeah, so I, like a lot of people, or a lot of therapists, I guess, I myself struggled with an eating disorder as well as a substance use disorder. And I struggled with those for most of my life throughout high school and into college, and, didn't really get into recovery until after that. And like a lot of people who have that overlap, I really struggled with finding a therapist who could understand the overlap. And I would kind of go to one therapist and she would help me with my eating disorder, and I would go to another therapist and she would help me with my substance use disorder. And I really had to learn for myself and through kind of, the different people that I saw, how those overlap to define recovery for myself. Because what happened is I got into recovery from my eating disorder, and then I relapsed in my substance use disorder. And then I got into recovery from that, and then I started having eating disorder symptoms again. So I really believe that this is just a really important topic. And I kind of promised myself as I went through this, I always loved working with people. And I really promised myself that if I made it to the other side, I would spend my life helping other people figure out that nuance and making it to the other side. So that's what I did when I finally got into recovery. I went back to school and I became a therapist.
Wow, that's awesome. That is so, I love it when you're able to do work that's so meaningful on a personal level and just really helps you feel like you have purpose on this earth. That's something not everybody gets to have. So that's awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's, a lot of people sometimes say, how do you discover your purpose? And I think it's like, your purpose is just what you create, Who knows whether this was deemed my purpose, but I decided through this that this was my purpose.
Well, and so often your purpose is a result of your pain too, right?
Absolutely. I totally believe that.
Well, and I think it's also important to mention too that when you're in the middle of going through something painful like an eating disorder or a struggle with substance use disorder, it can be really difficult to see the light at the end of the tunnel and to see that there might be purpose to it. But often in retrospect, you're able to be like, yep, that's when things change for me. It's not always in the moment you can see that.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Absolutely.
So what you described, just kind of the brief overview of your experience with this intersection, I have to mention, I see that so often as well, that it's sort of, it can feel like such a rock and a hard place. It's like, well, if I work on one of my struggles, the other one rears its ugly head. And then if I work on that one, then I feel like I go right back to this other struggle. And so can you just kind of dive in a little bit deeper, whether that's from your personal experience or your professional experience? Why is that? And what are the similarities between struggling with addiction, substance use disorders, and or an eating disorder? Why are they similar, and why do they seem to kind of it seems like you're playing a game of whack-a-mole?
Yeah, absolutely. I think they're a lot more similar than people often talk about or give credit to. And really, when I think about eating disorders and substance use disorders, really it boils down to this wanting to be in control. And we know that a lot, that's pretty common when we talk about eating disorders. It's pretty obvious to a lot of people, oh, right, eating disorders are, they're boiled down to wanting to be in control. And stuff like that. But what I think people don't realize a lot of times is substance use disorders are also dominated by wanting to feel in control. It's odd because you present as being very out of control if you're using substances that, end up really making your life be out of control. But a lot of times I really believe that the root of both is this preoccupation, this desire to feel like you're in control of something that isn't controllable. And a lot of times that can be our emotions. People with substance use disorders and addictions often have eating disorders, and it's a desire to feel in control of those emotions and numb those emotions. And the avenue that we go to do that just might be different. Someone might pick up a drink. Someone else might want to, change how they look. But it's all based on this false sense of control that starts a lot of times with our emotions. So I really think that's where the intersection starts. And it's also what gets scary or messy, I guess we could say, when we start to try to figure out recovery, because if they start in a similar place, I guess, but we kind of have them branch off into two different directions. When when you get into recovery and let's say you put down drugs or alcohol, a lot of times, number one, they can intersect with eating disorders because it's really shocking how many people, especially women, they want to control their weight, or that was a happy consequence of using. And then they might gain weight or their body might change when they get into recovery, and it makes going back to that eating disorder or engaging in some symptoms for the first time more attractive. So that's one piece. The other piece really is they start feeling again in either, whether your primary was an eating disorder or substance use disorder. Most of the times when you put down those, symptoms, you start feeling again for the first time and feeling a lot, and you don't have the skills to learn how to handle those emotions. So you end up wanting to do something else to numb or feel in control in a different way.
Absolutely. That is so true to what I've seen. And just so that people understand my experience with this topic, I worked for many years in a treatment center for substance use disorders, and I would go in each week and I would teach. It's called Nutrition Group, but it was kind of like a little nutrition lesson, and then lots of sharing, lots of discussion and exploration of many of the topics I talk about on the podcast as well. And so through that experience and also having individual clients in this similar place, I started to learn about just how similar, food struggles and struggles with substances are. And also there are distinctions as well, right? Like we have to eat. So that's a little bit of a distinction. Sobriety with food doesn't exactly work. So as we move through the conversation, as you share your experience and your expertise, I just want people to understand when I kind of chime in with my experience, that's kind of where I'm coming from. So, okay, so there are similarities. It tends to sort of boil down to this idea of how do I cope or numb or deal with things that feel unimaginably difficult, like our feelings or our emotions or things we're going through in our lives. And yes, it's so easy to morph from one struggle, one way of coping to another way of coping. So, so talk about, you said that emotions are inherently, uncontrollable. Can you just kind of talk a little bit more about that and what you mean, just so that if this concept is new to someone, they're able to kind of stay with us as we continue to explore this?
Yeah, so I think that there's on, especially with social media and just in the media in general, where I think people have this false sense that emotions, we should all just be like emotionally like stable. We should all just not feel emotions, or we would only feel, a lot of times people sometimes come into therapy with me and they really think that their natural state should be happy. And if there's anything outside of that, that there's something wrong. And really, I stress a lot in believing that if we look at this from like an evolutionary perspective, our brain, the way we were, developed was really survive. Our brain doesn't really care about whether we're happy or not. Of course, being happy and having joy in our life is important and valuable, but I think we can really get caught up in feeling like there's something wrong if we have emotions. And really, having a full range of emotions means you're alive. It's an important part of the human experience. There's nothing wrong with having an emotion. It's just that sometimes people don't like that, don't learn how to deal with their emotions. Parents don't teach children how to deal with emotions. And then we have this whole cycle of fearing our emotions, avoiding them, and then they get worse.
Well, and I think the big point is that it makes sense why we want to avoid our emotions, right? Like they can be very uncomfortable, they can be scary, and also, like you said, from a growing up perspective, a lot of times I noticed this in myself as a mom of 2 young kids. I noticed the sort of tendency I have to be like, it's okay, don't cry. and then it's like, well, no wonder we end up being adults who are like thinking we shouldn't cry, or thinking that there's something wrong with feeling something intensely. And maybe there's a better way for us to approach our children that can kind of teach them like, hey, it's okay to have this emotion. And also, like, when you're ready, let's talk about what we do next. Or I don't know. I'm just kind of throwing that out there.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think the more we can normalize emotions around kids, the more we can be like, it's okay to feel the way you're feeling, the more we can teach our kids. There's actually a term that I really love. It's called emotional granularity. And specifically that term it predicts, it's like how specifically you can identify your emotions is a predictor for how you're able to work through your emotions and handle your emotions. So sometimes I think about it as like young kids, if the only words they have to describe their emotions are like sad, happy, and mad, they're going to be sad, happy, or mad 1/3 of their life. Where if you can give yourself and other, kids too, a broader range of different words and different ways to describe their emotions, it's going to impact how they feel too.
Yeah, because our brain is kind of like there's different ways of conceptualizing our brain, but a little bit like a search engine, right? Where it's like, okay, what is going on right now? What can we call that? And then, what tools and skills and resources do we have for that thing that's going on, right? Like, I'm feeling hungry. What can I do about that? Or I'm feeling frustrated. What are my tools available for that feeling? You're so right. If all we have is like, I'm happy, or I'm mad, or I'm sad, maybe we don't end up finding the right tools for ourselves if we're actually feeling like lonely or frustrated or discouraged or something else, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, that's really cool. I've never heard that term. Okay, so thanks for kind of getting on that tangent with me. The idea that emotions are part of the human experience. They're something that's very natural and normal, and yet some of the ways that we're socialized kind of teach us that they're to be feared, or to be numbed or pushed down, or to not really be felt. And the whole point in us exploring this is to kind of connect it back to our topic of this can often be the root of a struggle with food or substances that this inability or this just lack of skills in knowing how to feel or how to get better and develop more skills in feeling the way that it is that we're feeling.
Yeah, absolutely.
So how did that play out for you? How were you able to kind of eventually heal when it came to this intersection and these struggles you were going through?
Yeah. So for me, and I think this is really something that I really was excited to chat with you about, is I think a lot of people who come from just a substance use disorder background end up sometimes like pathologizing food, and it becomes people then get into things where they're afraid that they're addicted to sugar, and and I did that for a while when I was trying to get in. I had put down, substances, and I had gotten into recovery from that. And then I thought that I had a sugar addiction, and I got really obsessed with sugar, and my, eating disorder morphed into this whole other fear. And I got really scared that I would, a lot of the traditional substance use, disorder background is that sugar addiction is real and we need to be ruthless and we're quote unquote addicts and we need to look for anything that might cause an addiction in something else. And I think the recovery community can get, although I understand where that comes from, because yes, there can be other ways that we act out when one thing goes away, when we work on, getting into recovery from a substance use disorder, it can get really messy when we start having food be involved. And I think, that's where I love, and I didn't get into recovery specifically from my eating disorder and from both until I was able to really learn about intuitive eating and learn that actually maybe food isn't the problem, sugar isn't the problem. I'm not addicted to sugar because unlike a substance, which is actually addictive, you can survive without drinking, without doing other substances. That's not the way that nature intended. We can't survive without eating. And I struggled a lot with feeling like I can put down, substances. I can do that. But how do I recover from food also? How do I recover from my eating disorder when I have to eat? And that was really, it wasn't until I found intuitive eating and the health at every size model that I was really able to get into recovery from both and feel stable in both.
Okay, I want to ask you more follow-up questions about that. And before we move on in that direction, I do want to mention that if any of you are hearing what Amanda's saying about sugar and you're like, wait, what? What is she talking about? I actually have a whole podcast episode exploring food addiction and exploring whether or not this is like a fact or fiction. That's what it's called. It's called Food Addiction, Fact or Fiction. It's episode 94. And those of you who are familiar with the podcast space in this space of podcasting, you'll know Marcy Evans. She was the person that I interviewed for that podcast. So I highly recommend you check that out if you're having if you're like a little skeptical about what Amanda's saying. Like, we dive into some good science there and kind of help to give you a little bit more to chew on, to use a pun, about food addiction. Okay. So Amanda, tell me about kind of what in particular was it about intuitive eating and health at every size that really helped to solidify your recovery with food? I'm really interested to know what stood out to you, what resonated, what made the difference for you.
Yeah, so I had previously, when I was trying to get into recovery from my eating disorder, been to different fellowships or subscribed to different beliefs that talked about how, I really, like I said, I thought that I had an addiction to sugar. I thought that if I could just cut out sugar, I would be able to heal from my eating disorder. And I found that actually that was the opposite. The more I tried to limit all sugar, the crazier I felt, the more I felt like my eating disorder reared its head back up. And the more I felt like, when you stop, of course, there's a phenomenon of craving with substance use disorders, where when you stop, especially if you're your body is physically addicted to a substance, you go through withdrawal and stuff like that. But eventually, as you have more time, that goes away. And I felt like it was the opposite when I was trying to cut out sugar. I felt like the more days went on, the more months went on, I felt crazier. I did Whole30s, I did stuff like that. And I just kept feeling like this is more of the same. This is actually more of my eating disorder, just morphed as me trying to pretend to like be healthy. And I think
Yeah.
that's what's really hard is it does show up that way. I know you talk about like, orthorexia and stuff like that, where we can get our eating disorders are naturally shapeshifters. And especially now, most people know that diets aren't quote unquote good or they cause people to regain weight. But now diets have shapeshifted in their lifestyles and Whole30 and, different types of things like that that are still diets. So I really felt like I was getting more unhealthy as I went down that road. And it wasn't until I found intuitive eating and the model that was like, eat what you want, take the guilt away. And at first, and maybe some, listeners will connect with this too. I felt like, well, I have done that before. I have let myself eat whatever I wanted. That was what my eating disorder looked like. I was eating whatever I wanted. I was doing other things too, but
Well, and it was probably a result of restriction too, right?
exactly. And that's, I think, the piece that a lot of times people really miss. And it's like, were you actually letting yourself eat whatever you want without guilt? Because if guilt is always in the background, you don't really have the freedom.
Well, and if guilt's always in the background, you have to recognize that, you are mentally committing to yourself. Like, let's say you are eating those chocolate chip cookies. If you're feeling guilty about them, you are mentally telling yourself, I will not let myself do this tomorrow because I feel so guilty about this, or I won't let myself do this again. This is the last time. This won't happen again. Tomorrow, I'll do quote better. And that's the same exact thing as restriction, right? That's just restriction in a different form. And as you're committing to not doing it again, you then create the current moment restriction, deprivation, and also like, well, now's my chance, right?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Exactly. So it wasn't until I really fully understood, I like read the intuitive eating book cover to cover and found other resources and really started understanding that I hadn't actually tried to fully just eat what I wanted without guilt and really regain trust with my body. That things started to change for me. And specifically, I ended up finding a really great therapist who talked a lot with me about, well, what is an eating disorder and what were the behaviors that I was doing? Because rather than looking at it from, right, like the opposite, of course, of a substance use disorder is not using substances. The opposite of an eating disorder isn't not eating, your binge foods or not eating what have, purged with or stuff like that. It's really like actually what the root of the eating disorder, the opposite, the recovery of it would be is not doing the things that you did in your eating disorder. Or other things that other people have done in your eating disorder. And what I really got to was my eating disorder wasn't about my addiction to sugar. It wasn't about even changing my body that much, because in my experience, my body didn't change a ton. Really, what I got to was my eating disorder. And I think a lot of our eating disorders are really, it's this preoccupation. It's this feeling of being in control of your food and your body weight and your shape. Whether you're in control or not, it's this feeling that you could be. I could go on this diet. I could do this. I could change something. So from that point of view, I was like, well, I need to do the opposite of anything that led me to feeling like I'm in control of my food, body weight, and shape.
Okay, so what did that look like? Like, what does that mean?
Yeah. So for me, that looked like for a bit, I had to stop exercising because I was using exercise compulsively to feel like I was in control of my body weight or feel like I was making up for food that I ate. It also looked like doing things. It looked like really like surrendering to, I would do weird things with my food. For example, like I wouldn't want to eat breakfast in the day. And it really meant, I think for some of us in the beginning and the book Intuitive Eating, of course, talks about this too, is depending on where you are in recovery from your eating disorder, is you might have to just get back into the habit of just eating regular meals, even if you're not hungry. And I had to do that. I like surrendered to someone else kind of choosing the food for me. And I gave up control of that until my weight stabilized, and I was able to then regain the ability to be in touch with my body sensations and start really getting curious and trying out and eating what food sounded good. And it started with I ate like ice cream for a really long time because I didn't let myself eat ice cream for a really, really long time. And it was scary, and I was terrified that I would never stop eating ice cream, but I continued, and I trusted what other people told me, and I tried different things. And it's really cool when you end up getting back in touch with what your body, it's like being returned to sanity. I feel like it's like being returned to your natural state of like a child, being able to eat what you want and be in touch with what you need. And I think it's just one of the coolest experiences when you're on the other side.
Yeah. And it makes you fired up to want to help other people, right?
Absolutely.
So one thing you said stood out to me, and I kind of want to explore it with you. So you said the opposite of struggling with a substance is to just put the substance down and not use it anymore. But the opposite of struggling with food, you're not really able to just put the food down. And I think that that's one really big distinction between these two kind of paths of recovery. But I also want to sort of explore like what it's not really just putting down the substance, right? Like I mean, what really, to me, I guess I'm not going to expect you to read my mind here. To me, I wonder if the opposite of addiction is, not necessarily sobriety. I don't know. What's your thought on that? I'm not saying sobriety is wrong or bad, but I wonder if it, like, that's the physical opposite.
Yeah.
That's the thing you do that's opposite. But what about like the emotional side of that? Like, is it connection? Is it healing? Like what does that look like on an emotional level, the opposite of struggling with a substance?
Yes, absolutely. So I think, I mean, the start, of course, is just putting down the substances, but that is absolutely the tip of the iceberg. And I think that's where eating disorders and substance use disorders, a lot of the below the iceberg deeper work is pretty similar. In really, like, when we start getting into the deeper levels of recovery, it looks like, both of those experiences are typically really isolating. It does look like reconnecting with people, finding, support in your life, learning how to cope with your emotions, learning skills to be able to communicate. A huge, huge thing that happens when you're dealing with a substance use disorder or an eating disorder is you don't learn how to communicate what you need and what you want, and you don't even know what you need and what you want, so you can't communicate that with other people. So I think all of these kind of, and that's where I use the term a lot of times, emotional sobriety is like that next level of how do we, because a lot of times too, if we're using substances or we're engaging in an eating disorder, we're not emotionally maturing because we're just so engaged in that. So when we get into recovery, it looks like doing that maturing of being able to advocate for ourselves, being able to say what we want, being able to be in touch with ourselves, and being able to differentiate who we are versus other people. If there's trauma or other things that went on earlier in life or during, an eating disorder or the time when we were using substances, that needs to be healed. So yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Yes, I love that. And the way the visual you gave was so helpful, the metaphor of the iceberg, that the tip of the iceberg for an eating disorder versus a substance use disorder might be different. But when it comes to what's underneath it all and the emotional side of all of this stuff, the human side of all of this stuff, it's the same thing, right?
Absolutely. For an eating disorder, it looks like, learning how to eat again and not engaging in behaviors that might be trying to control your food or body weight or shape. And with substance use disorders, it looks like not engaging in the things you did when you were in your addiction and not consuming substances. But what's going to keep you in recovery is that deeper internal work. And if you don't actually, if you think of that as an iceberg, if you don't dissolve those deeper parts of the iceberg, eventually something is going to keep floating back to the top. And when you had originally asked me, I think, like, why is kind of go from one or another or other things pop up, I really believe it's because when we don't do that internal work and learn how to fully heal and exist in the world, we will find something else to deal with that underbelly of emotion and unhealed stuff.
Yeah, that is such a helpful way to understand it. And I think that's going to really resonate for people. I get the vibe, so you kind of alluded to this, I get the vibe that the eating disorder community doesn't talk a lot with the substance use disorder community and vice versa. Like, I think there's sort of like, yep, you're your own people, you're doing your own thing, and we're our own people doing our own thing. And I think it's a shame because that was my experience in the treatment center too. I kind of felt like they expected me to approach food one way, the clients and sometimes even the staff. And I had to sort of educate, like, look, guys, we're talking about very similar things here, and I'm not going to like put someone on some like restrictive, fear-mongering way of eating in the name of, healing from this addiction that they're struggling with. Like, that doesn't make any sense. And I think people, I don't know. What are your thoughts about that? What could we do better as clinicians and professionals to kind of bridge this gap a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I totally relate to what you said because I also worked in an addiction treatment center for a while, and it was also very similar of there was no sugar allowed. There was no eating in between meals. Like, there were a lot of rules around things that then ended up either flaring up old eating disorders in people or causing people to act in a way of like hiding food and doing things like that, which makes so much sense when, food is being restricted. It's like a normal response to that. And it was really sad to see how the staff and just like the way it was conceptualized was just like, oh, it's because quote unquote, they're addicts, they're addicted, they're just trying to find something else to do, rather than since I, had an eating disorder and was in recovery and also was working with some, eating disorder clients on the side and stuff like that, I really saw it as no, like we're prescribing eating disorder behavior to, people that are trying to get into recovery from substance use disorders. Of course they're going to react this way.
Yeah.
So I think in regards to your question of what could we do better, I think like the communities need to come together. I think there's a lot of just like it's us versus them. And I think a lot of people find them so different that they're just, I think it is more, even if you look at this in a broader scale of right, mental health in general, if you look at the DSM right now, it's like you have a disorder or you don't. I mean, we've made some progress in calling some things scales, but I think that is the whole issue is clinicians aren't really taught to look at things as a scale that much. We're taught someone has anxiety or they don't because they meet these criteria. And if they meet 4 out of 5 and they need 5, they don't have this. And I think that's more of the issue is the way that mental health disorders are still conceptualized is still very black and white, all or nothing in itself. So then it breeds clinicians who look for, they look to say, well, I specialize in this, I don't specialize in that, so you're going to go over there. You have anxiety or you don't, so you meet this or you don't. Where I think if we can look at everything as a continuum, as a spectrum, if we can collaborate more and more clinicians can really start to specialize in and look at the overlap, it will do a lot of good.
Yeah, I agree. I totally love that idea. I wish that was our reality. So one thing that I wanted to mention too is that my suspicion, no one's ever said this to me, but my suspicion is that folks think that the type of rhetoric around eating disorder recovery is sort of just like this unique kind of weird way to talk about food and bodies that is only applicable to people who have struggled with eating disorders. So in other words, to make this less abstract, when people hear like eat what you want and connect to your body and take away the guilt from food, and your weight does not define your worth, and those types of things, a lot of people tend to sort of think of that as like, yeah, that's great for someone in eating disorder recovery, but that doesn't apply to me because X, Y, and Z reason. So I wonder if part of the reason for the communities kind of not meeting up and aligning is, I think sometimes they're like the eating disorder recovery rhetoric is so countercultural that I think it's a lot to ask of people to like do this work who may not really even be aware that you know, that message that we give to people in recovery from eating disorders, like that's not just for them, that's for everybody. Like that's true regardless of body size, regardless of socioeconomic status or race or gender or sexual identity or whatever it is. Like this is a countercultural thing that like we're still kind of trying to get the word out about.
Absolutely. I totally agree with that. And I think too, like, it's exactly like that. And it's like that in substance use disorder communities also, of like, well, quote unquote, we're addicts, so we're different. We think differently. And it's really like the more that I'm in this field, the more that I look at myself and the more I work with other people, it's like, this isn't just an eating disorder thing or a substance use disorder thing. This is like a human condition thing. Like we all are afraid to feel our emotions. We all want to control how we look, and we all want to fit in, and we all want to be loved and accepted. We might do different things to do that. But the more I think we can look at everything as a spectrum, and this is, you know, the eating disorders and substance use disorders are just more extreme versions of where we could all be given enough pain, the more we can understand that there aren't specific things to be subscribed to or prescribed to specific people.
Yes. Oh, that was so beautifully said. That's it right there, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, because it's interesting because, you know, Paige, when I started, you know, when I got into recovery, I lost I totally isolated myself from everybody throughout college and high school because of my struggles. And I remember talking to my therapist and saying, you know, I only can have friends with people who either have an eating disorder or are in recovery from a substance use disorder, because those are the only people I understand. And I used to think that like those are my people, and other people, I just don't get them, quote unquote. And thankfully I did a yoga teacher training and I started getting really involved. I'm a yoga teacher, and I got really involved in teaching yoga trainings, which required kind of doing like group therapy in a yoga level. And the more I really saw like this isn't specific. This is just the human condition. This is just, we're all the same underneath it. People with eating disorders or substance use disorders might show it more because they're in more pain, but we're all like, fundamentally, when we boil it down, we all want the same things. We all want to be loved, accepted, good enough, fit in. We just handle it differently.
Yes. And I think that that's ultimately super empowering, at least in my opinion, because what that says to me is you don't do any of this work in isolation, right? So if you are doing the underneath the iceberg work with eating disorder recovery, that is going to be profoundly helpful in your approach to relationships or jobs, or maybe if you have a substance use disorder or other elements of what's going on in your life. Like if we really can boil down these struggles and this human condition into, like we can develop skills that can then help us in different areas of life. I just feel like that's so hopeful, because then it's not, oh, I have so much work to do in this area of life, and this area of life, and this area of life. If we can recognize it all connects and it all benefits us to work on some of these things, I don't know, that just seems really hopeful to me.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think it like creates a lot less work too, because a lot of times people come to me, especially those who struggle with multiple things, and they're like, oh my God, I have to deal with an eating disorder. And then I also have to stop drinking or using. And then I maybe have to deal with trauma because I also specialize in that. And it's really like all of it. Yeah. The tip might be different. You might have to do more work in terms of learning how to intuitively eat or doing different things in addition to other things. But exactly, all the deeper work is the same, and it's going to benefit you in all of those different areas. And then we don't have to say this person needs this treatment and this person needs that treatment. Then we could actually conserve resources in terms of clinicians, I think, too. And like, if we treated everyone the same, we wouldn't have to, like, that's right. That's the whole health at every size approach, is we don't prescribe eating disorder behavior to someone regardless of their, body weight.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's such a good point. So tell me, I think this podcast obviously spends a lot of time talking about the food side of these types of struggles. I'm interested in you shedding some light on, I feel like, especially with drinking, let's just talk specifically about drinking. I feel like people are a little bit afraid to go there to like talk about, how do you know if you have a problem and what does that look like, and how do you know if you need help, and how do you know like if full-on sobriety is the answer for you, and like how does someone navigate these questions that I think when you go and see your doctor, they're like, do you drink more than like it's just like this very simple, like, well, you drink more than what is recommended, therefore stop doing that, so give us more to work with when it comes to, let's just say, like the drinking question.
Sure. Is a good one to focus on too, because it's like the average person who you meet probably drinks alcohol. So I think really, and that's where, again, I think like looking at things as a continuum is so helpful, because if we're stuck with this like static, you either are an alcoholic or you have a substance use disorder or you don't, we're really limited in terms of the questions we can ask. And what I really like to work with and ask people when I'm working with them is like, really, how does it make you feel? Is it benefiting your life? Is it taking away from your life? Because everything we do is going to have, positive and negative impacts. There's things we get from doing things, and there's things that it costs us from doing different things. So I'm a really big believer in choice, and people get to do whatever they want. And, a lot of people know that I'm sober, and it's funny because sometimes people, especially people in the substance use disorder community, are like, what? You don't always prescribe like sobriety? But I just really believe that everyone gets to choose for themselves what works for them and what doesn't. And I think if we can start to look at it that way, if you can start to look at, for example, specific questions of like, how is it impacting your relationships? How is it impacting your performance at work? How is it impacting your joy and satisfaction? Like, do you get hungover? Does it bother you when you're hungover, or are you okay with it? Is it worth going out with your friends and not feeling so great the next morning? Other questions like, how does it impact your physical health? Like, I mean, of course, I think once it starts to get into physical health, like, there are bigger consequences of if you're drinking so much that, you have like liver issues going on or stuff like that. But for the most part, the average person, I really think it comes down to what works for them and what doesn't, depending on their lifestyle and how it impacts like their fulfillment and productivity.
Yeah. And like that kind of that umbrella of workability, like it's not about this rigid black and white thing. It's more about zooming out and looking at the spectrum and kind of maintaining awareness about what's important to you, and are the things, beyond even alcohol, like are the things you're doing in your life working for you or against you, and do you need to revisit things, or like I think that's just a constant constantly evolving process, hopefully for most people, to just continue to kind of assess that and look at that.
Yeah, and I love that framework in general of I think people get very interested in wanting to find the thing that works for them. And if we can shift into being like, no, actually our lives are a constant evolution, and depending on what's going on, what we're up to, what our goals are, what we need to do to take care of ourselves is going to shift and evolve. You know, like I think of the example of myself of like when I first started my private practice, I was alone a lot. So I needed way more social interaction than I did before because I wasn't around enough people. But now I have a group practice and I work with colleagues, so I need less social interaction. And if we can look at things as just this, you know, it's never going to be perfect. We're never going to be in perfect alignment. But it's a process of how can we meet our goals and how can we meet our needs best right now, and knowing that it'll change and mold, I think is a much healthier way to look at it. Yeah, and effective.
Yeah, and your point about the whole like spectrum idea, I think is really fascinating to kind of sit with, especially when it relates to like mental health diagnoses. So, that's really super fascinating to me. I love that. And I think ultimately way more helpful and way more accessible for people to kind of look at their own mental health struggles on a spectrum rather than do I have this or do I not?
Yeah, and I think that's even a thing that can stop people from going to see a therapist or going to see a nutritionist, right? Is like we have this idea of, well, I need to be doing this, and that's, you know, I think that's where it's like cool, this new wave of, I think, therapists, especially of talking about how therapy can be for anyone for any reason. You don't need to have an official diagnosis to see a therapist. It's this spectrum of if like it's one tool. It might work for you. It might not work for you. But I think looking at things, the more we can talk about things as a spectrum, I think also really helps with reducing stigma. Because then we're all the same versus it's me versus you.
We need more of that in our world.
Absolutely.
Okay, what else do you want people to know about this topic? I feel like I'm doing my best with questions, but I'm interested to know what else have we not looked at that you wanted to mention today?
Yeah, I feel like we've done a good job of covering a lot of stuff. I'm trying to think. You know, I think just like to wrap up and to talk a little bit more about, I loved the question you had, Paige, about how can we bridge this gap and have communities come together. And I think one thing that's hard is when we have labels and we have separation, it also has people stop listening. So it's like if someone comes in and I'm a therapist and I don't work with someone with substance use disorders, and they start telling me that they drank X amount that has me feel like they have a substance use disorder, I stop listening and I like tell them that they need to go see someone else. And I think that's like a really big thing that can stop people from getting like effective help, in that we're quick to just stop listening and not deal with that discomfort. And I think all of this, you know, like if I look at what you talk about, Paige, about nuance, and which I'm also a huge fan of, I think if we look at like why as clinicians, why as a society are we so afraid of nuance, it's because it's uncomfortable. It's like it requires saying, I don't know. It requires listening. It requires not being an expert. It requires being uncomfortable and not having the exact answer. And it's just so interesting how as our world has become more polarized, I think it's really because we're very afraid to just sit in that discomfort of not knowing everything.
Yeah, and I think about that from the perspective of the person seeking therapy, who probably carries a lot of feelings of I'm too much or I'm not enough simultaneously, and then they share and open up about what they're going through, and then for them to be met with go see someone else. You know, and granted, like I'm a big believer in refer out if you do not have the skill set, if you don't feel comfortable, like that's fine. I'm not saying that's wrong, but when you were sharing that, I was like, oh, that must just tap into that must hit on so much of what that person's already carrying and already worried about and already struggling with, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And then I think that's really hard with like insurance and the way, our mental or our medical, care is set up too, is it's like, well, if you don't exactly meet these, guidelines, you don't have a diagnosis, you don't qualify to go to therapy, you don't need therapy. And I think everyone gets to determine for themselves whether they could benefit from therapy or not. I don't like if we just can destigmatize there are people who need therapy and there are people who don't need therapy, or there are people who need support of a dietitian or whatever, and there are people who don't. We could all have a lot more freedom and choice.
Yeah, I agree. And, I will say the same thing. I'll echo what you're saying. I think everyone could benefit from having someone who's skilled at listening and skilled at kind of digging in where it's necessary. I think everyone could benefit from that, regardless of mental health status, for sure.
Absolutely.
Well, this has been so fun, Amanda. Share with the audience how people can find you and your practice and your work. You talked about that a little bit in the beginning, but talk a little bit more about that now.
Yeah. So you can follow me on Instagram. That's probably the easiest. My handle on Instagram is Therapy for Women. And my private practice is also called Therapy for Women, which is why that's the name of my handle. And it's located in Philadelphia. Our website is therapyforwomencenter.com. But the other really cool thing which I talked about a little bit too, is I lead yoga and mental health retreats. And we lead those in different places all around the world. This year we're going to Tulum in April. And it's a really cool way to get away and really have really build community. And they were really created for myself out of the transformative experience I would have in group therapy and also at yoga trainings. And I really thought to myself, why isn't there something that combines both? These are so compatible. So that's one of my favorite things to do, and there's more info on that on my website.
Yeah, and I think that there's so much you can gain from the physical practice of moving your body in yoga. Like, there's things that you can learn easier with your body than you can learn intellectually, and sometimes it just helps stuff click.
I totally agree.
Yeah, that's so cool, and I love that you're incorporating that body aspect of healing, because I think, I just think it helps us learn things on a different level. And I think for most of us, we need as many levels of learning that we can get,
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's something that's so just unique and profound that we can get from movement, from a mental health perspective, from integrating things that we learn. I'm just I'm a big nerd when it comes to psychology and your body and your brain. And we process things on a different level with our bodies. And it's really cool when we can have both come together.
Yeah. Oh, totally. Well, thank you so much, Amanda. This has been so fun to talk with you today. I'm so glad that you took the time to share your story and your wisdom. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Paige.